Today I have the great honor of introducing a really, really special friend. I got to know him, I want to say just under a year ago. Our journey and relationship began. And it's so beautiful that we're getting to speak about every word leaves a trace, because this is somebody not knowing at the time that I'd be spending so much time with him now, but I got to see how he loves everything that he's going to share today on every word leaves a trace. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Neeraj. And
Thank you.
another small part of the introduction, Neeraj is officially, for everybody who doesn't know and who joins regularly, Neeraj has officially accepted the role of chair of the Think Gita leadership team. So welcome, Neeraj, and a massive congratulations for this new role, and thank you for this amazing service that you're undertaking in leading this really beautiful service.
Thank you, Mahal, so much. Yeah, we're super excited. I think the team asked us to come and share a couple of words on this topic, but more than that, we just wanted to spend some time with with the team. So we thought, yeah, let's do this Thursday night. And this topic obviously is quite interesting. It's actually funny because obviously we just took on this service, and I guess it's like a divine arrangement that whatever you're going to speak today, you better hold to it. You better share something that you're actually going to be able to sort of live up to. So that's I guess my challenge. And for you all, I hope that your challenge can be that we all interact with each other and see how we can make the discussion as useful as possible for each other, rather than sort of me just sharing some things. I'm sure that you guys coming to these different sessions and also being keen readers of Bhagavad-gita maybe have many insights also to share with all of us. So we really invite you to bring across your perspectives, your questions, etc. Um, so yeah, let's try and unpack this topic if you guys are up for it. Mehul, yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. So let me give a quick just structure for everybody. Um, so please jump in, anyone, if you feel this didn't work as well. But last week we had quite an interactive session, and I thought it was really amazing to see everybody interacting. And it felt like everybody took out a lot from the session last week. So I spoke to Neeraj, and he said he's keen to do quite an interactive session first, where he shares on the topic and then tries to keep it interactive for 30 minutes. And then I can ask a few questions to just warm everybody up, but I also don't need to ask any questions if everybody has lots of questions that they'd like to ask. So yeah, very happy to just go with the interactive session in the start, and then we go into questions after. Over to
Let's
you.
do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah, so in terms of this topic, every word leaves a trace, or the sort of the impact of our speech. I was sort of just reflecting on it, and I feel like it's an interesting and very important topic because as we think about our daily lives, so often a lot of our disturbance in the mind is based on relationships. It's based on interactions that we've had. It's like, why did I say this to that person? Or why did they do this to me? Or why did they respond in this way to what I did? That's kind of the constant dialogue, right? I guess that we face on a day-to-day basis. Just even earlier today, I was speaking to one friend, and that was basically the topic of conversation. They were sort of sharing a couple of experiences that they've had in their own relationships and asking questions on why this and why that, and how certain things that people said and did had a huge impact on their sort of mental health and their mental state over the last few months. And I think probably many of us can relate to that. I definitely can relate to that. And so it's a nice topic that the team has kind of arranged to just allow us some space to together dive into this topic and see how we can really understand and unpack the wisdom of the Gita in relation to a topic that's very dear to our minds. Let's put it that way. And hopefully, over the course of the next 30 minutes or so, I can share a couple of things that were coming to my own mind. And over the course of the hour, we can really try to discuss and churn these topics with each other. I guess the first thing to think about is, why is the Gita, a authority on this topic? What does the Gita have to say? How do we establish that the Gita has something to speak about this topic of speech and this topic of speech in relationship? And as I was thinking through that, I was trying to just unpack and understand what is it that the Gita has as the basis for even making any commentary on this. It's explained that in the Vedic texts, you can actually go to them and get whatever you like. In the first few verses of one of the Vedic texts, the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the third verse particularly, it explains that the Vedic texts are like a desire tree. So whatever it is that we desire, we can actually source those things from these texts. And therefore, the Bhagavad Gita, sometimes within the Think Gita presentation, we speak about the Gita as being a philosophical text. We speak about it as being a spiritual text, religious text, and also a deep text of just trying to uncover the human condition within this world. And one of the things that the Gita very much focuses on is relationship. It's our relationship, particularly with divinity, but also our relationship with the world around us. And the topic of relationship is really the focus of the middle chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, the six middle chapters. And in those, in that context of this topic of relationship, I think there's something for us to unpack in relation to this topic that we're kind of touching on today, because relationship is kind of the basis for speech, right? In one sense, i.e., we're speaking and we're having conversation, interaction, exchange in the context of relationship. And so this is kind of really a nice place that we can spend some time. And the difficulty or the adventure, let's say, with relationship is that we are complicated beings. Right. And so, how do we bring together this idea of complexity in the world around us and the people around us with how to be as effective as possible in communicating, and therefore be in a world where our communication and our speech with each other is uplifting rather than being harmful, rather than being disturbing. One of the things that Krishna explains to Arjuna is that Bhakto Sime Sakha Cheti Rahasyamidam Uttamam, that because you're my dear friend, you can understand my confidential truths. So it explains to Arjuna that I'm a very complex person. Right? How many of you guys can relate? Maybe put some comments in the chat if you guys see the world and the people around you as being complex. Let us know in the comments, or put up some reactions, whatever we do on Zoom. Okay, we got something. Adriel's, yeah, okay. Mehul feels is complex. No. Okay. So some reactions, right? We're complex beings, and those around us are also complex beings. And so Krishna gives a secret there. He says, if you want to understand if you want to understand something very complex in relation to interpersonal relationship, he says bhakto and he says sakha. He says, be a devotee and be a friend. And so the reason he says devotee is because he explains that the relationship of divinity to the living entities in this world is one of devotee and devoted, right? And friend is one of those typical types of relationships that one can have with each other. And so he basically makes the point that we have to have deep relationship to understand this complexity, right? He starts with this point of relationship is the key to actually conscious communication, because unless we've understood the person, unless we're coming from a place of clarity and understanding, then the speech that will follow in the course of that relationship will naturally not hit the core, right? It will naturally not hit the heart, but rather it will just be scratching perhaps on the surface somewhere. So in that context, I just reflected on 3 points that we could maybe discuss over the course of the next 10, 15 minutes as to how we can think about being more effective as communicators, and how we can think about our speech having more of an uplifting impact on people rather than having a sort of disturbing impact on people. And in the context of understanding this, also, we then have a better ability to basically relate to other people when they are speaking to us in maybe uplifting or disturbing ways. Because that's one of our key, difficulties that we're facing that you guys were also sharing on a day-to-day basis. So we came up with this idea of cup as a sort of acronym that we can sort of discuss over the course of the next 10, 15 minutes. And we often hear this concept that one's cup has to be full before they can fill other people's cup. And if we think about this idea of communication and speech uplifting other people, this idea of having a full cup to uplift other people is a necessity. And the first of these points in the context of cup is clarity of vision. This is the first point that was coming to us, is that if we reflect on the Gita, although we're speaking on this topic of conscious speech and the power of our speech, if we reflect on the Gita, the first thing that Krishna actually calls Arjuna to do is to think about a deeper understanding of who he is, right? He sort of says, go beyond the surface level, think deep. And so in the same way, when we're thinking about understanding each other and being more effective as communicators with each other, the first thing that was coming to mind was clarity of vision in terms of how we're seeing things. Because oftentimes where our lack of ability to perceive things in the appropriate way is what leads to harmful speech, right? The fact that we observe things as being related to ourselves, for example, why did you do this to me? Is often a huge cause of suffering and grievance for our own selves. And so this idea of clarity of vision in the Gita, because obviously we're in Gita here, in the Gita, one of the things that Krishna really, pushes Arjuna to think about is the idea that within this world there are different forces acting, right? And maybe in previous sessions you all have spoken about the modes of material nature. And one of the things that is coming up as a topic is that later on in the Gita, after these 6 chapters that we're speaking about, one of the characteristics that is given for the mode of goodness is that it illumines all the gates of the body, right? And it's interesting because our teachers give the understanding that when somebody is situated in good habits, right? Whether it be related to the time of the day that one is operating in, whether it's related to the types of food that one is eating, the types of people that one is associating with, the types of habits that one has, it explains that the gates of the body are being illumined. And that's an interesting statement because what does it actually mean practically for us? What it means, according to our teachers, is that one sees things clearly. So one can actually observe situations clearly, rather than seeing things with a sort of perverted vision, which then leads to perverted outcomes. One can start this equation by seeing things very clearly. And so, interestingly enough, although we're speaking here about speech and the power of our communication, the first thing that was coming to mind is that one of the key topics of the Gita is pulling ourselves to come to the platform of clear observance, of clarity of vision, so that we start to see things more clearly. And this is one of the topics that if we can build in our life good habits, which I'm sure has been discussed perhaps in previous sessions, then one of the things that comes from those good habits is good vision, right? Sometimes we feel like many of these spiritual texts or self-development texts are pushing us to bring about habits which are constraining us. Like, why are you limiting my freedom within this world? Why are you limiting the way that I can act? But it's explained that these regulative aspects of self-development and of spirituality actually help us to see things clearly because they leave some space. They allow us in our life to create some space whereby we aren't, let's say, overpowered by the world around us, but rather we actually have clarity of vision in order to observe things. I guess the second aspect of this point on clarity of vision is that at the deepest level, one of the things that the Gita is really calling us to do is take up a spiritual practice, some sense of spiritual practice, whatever that may look like in our different situations. And the reason is because that spiritual practice is helping us further on this point of seeing the world clearly, right? It's calling us to connect with our real self, connect with our deeper self, and through that lens of vision, see reality. And I think these are two really important points because it's almost like we're sharpening, although we're speaking here about speech and the power of our words to each other, we're speaking here about sharpening the tools that later lead to that speech, right? It's almost like the foundation. It's almost like Arjuna's coming with a huge grievance in his life. And the first thing that Krishna's telling him is like, wait a second, but you know who you are. And it seems almost like a sidebar. Like, what is the connection between the question you're asking and the issue that I'm facing? But at least in our own mind, as we were thinking through this topic, then this point was coming that actually this idea of observing things clearly is quite important. It's interesting. There's a book. It's quite a famous book. It's called Nonviolent Communication, and I guess in one sense, it's touching on this topic that we're kind of speaking here about. And one of the key points that's made also in that book is this idea of being able to just observe things, right? Not necessarily, for example, when we're communicating with each other, this is one of the things that's becoming quite popular in the world through people sharing it on social media and things like that. This idea that when you're having a conversation with each other, you don't state that you did this, like, why did you do this? But you state that I observed that this is the actions that were, taking place in front of me, and it made me feel like X, Y, Z. And that's the idea of sort of conscious communication with each other. But that observance, i.e., that ability to see things clearly, the Gita is calling us to really go deep in order to have deeper level of insight into what's actually happening around us. How do we see things very, very clearly? And so we thought that this is kind of the first point of clarity of vision, how to be able to observe things without judging things, basically. This is one of the key topics of Gita. The second thing from this CUP acronym was understanding. So once you have these tools, let's say, that have been sharpened because you can see the world more clearly, then the question is, how do you apply? How do you apply those tools? What do you do with that observation? And one of the things that the Gita is really calling us to do is actually quite, you could say, is quite unique. And that call that's quite unique is that once you have this clarity of vision, then try to seek to understand the other person and also to seek to understand yourself. Both of these two things are required in the situation. Understand one's own needs, interests, concerns, and also understand those same factors, needs, interests, and concerns of the other person that one is interacting with, that one is speaking with, communicating with. And the reason that the Gita is quite unique in its offering, because again, you can go to a book like Nonviolent Communication or many other sort of self-development texts and research that's been done on this topic, is that if you want to apply this lens of understanding with clarity of vision from the first point that we're making, how do you have a deep understanding of somebody if you don't understand their entirety, right? And that's why Krishna's asking this first question of, wait, do you know who you are? Because only with that aspect do you actually see somebody for fully who they are, rather than just seeing aspects of the surface of what's playing out in front of us. And so the second point that we wanted to sort of share is that it impels us to come to an understanding that we are dealing in front of us with people who are spiritual by nature. And we are also spiritual by nature. And the nature of that person who is spiritual is that he's seeking pleasure, he's seeking fulfillment in this world. And due to not having had an ability to really repose that desire, to really repose that tendency, then we are searching outside, externally, on the material sort of sphere. And in the course of that searching, if we are trying to become fulfilled externally and we are not able to do that, it's very natural that we become frustrated. And that frustration is then what plays out in the context of this communication topic that we're speaking about. And so the Gita then calls us to really understand who it is that we are underneath on the deepest level, and then to understand how that aspect of us also has its manifestation in this world, i.e., our mind and intelligence, right? The idea that what is my nature, what is my sort of tendencies in this world, and what is the same factors for another person. So if we actually have this deeper level of understanding of who somebody is, as well as the second layer of understanding in terms of their makeup in this world, then can we really understand their needs, interests, and concerns? I think so. We have a much better lens, right? We have a much better sort of framework for understanding somebody. And this understanding is very much necessary because what you could say to somebody could be, what to one person could be hurtful, and to another person it could be uplifting, right? In order to really be uplifting to somebody, one has to know more about them. One has to understand them a little bit deeper, also going to the point that we were making earlier, as to what Krishna mentions to Arjuna. And so understanding means seeing somebody for their real self, but also seeing that there are forces at play in this world, and those forces are acting on us. And these modes are basically those forces, according to the Gita, that these modes, depending on how one is situated, are propelling us to act in sometimes helpful ways and sometimes harmful ways. So the example is given by one of the teachers of the Gita, Radhanath Swami, that we have, it's almost like we have a good dog and a bad dog sitting on both of our shoulders, right? So this is kind of one way of understanding the lens of the modes, that it's very natural that we're pulled to act in ways that are not sometimes helpful. But due to being able to have this vision of seeing it in that way, then we can interact with people accordingly. We can see things for what they are. And because we're seeing things for what they are, it's almost like, just imagine you're walking down a street and you see this like long, I don't know what you would call it. I mean, rope looking thing, but you think it's a snake because it looks exactly like a snake. It's coiled up. It's a 2 meter length. It's pretty much like a snake if you've seen one before. And you think it's a snake, but the reality is that it's actually just a rope. And there's a huge difference in how you'd react if you thought it was a snake versus if you thought it was a rope, right? Now, the Gita calls us to see things for what they are because it calls us to help, it causes us or it impels us to say, wait a second, but just see it as a rope rather than seeing it as a snake. And the only way that we can do that is seeing things for what they are on the deepest level. So this is kind of the second point, that with that clarity of vision, we can then understand things properly, right? We can then see people for who they are and see why they're acting for actually the deepest level. And having gained, let's say, those two aspects of understanding, the last aspect of the CUP acronym, so to say, is this idea of coming to the direct topic that we were speaking about, which is pleasing speech, which is uplifting speech. And if you think about it, and this is why at least we thought that it could work this way, if you've done those first two aspects, it's almost quite natural that the last aspect will just follow. Because you're seeing things clearly, because you're actually understanding the person on a deeper level, it's almost very natural that your speech is actually going to be much more uplifting, much more taking into account a person's circumstance, much more thinking about their best interest as well as your own best interest in that situation, because you're also one party in this situation. But one of the big difficulties that we face is that although we know things, although we see things clearly, we're sometimes still impelled to act in certain ways, right? We're sometimes still in the course of a situation pulled into acting somehow or the other. Like I know in my own life, I see this happening constantly. It's just like you study it, you think about it, you reflect on it, you're like, yeah, we got this. And then a situation comes about and you just literally go back to your own habitual ways. And it's like, why did you do this? Right? Like, how did you manage to do that? We literally we thought through it so much, etc. And it's nice because the Gita is one of those texts that actually says, wait a second, like, be reassured. This is normal. It's okay. It's natural for us to fall into that situation. It's natural for us to come into that situation where, although we practiced everything, although we thought about everything, although we studied these texts, we understood different messages, still sometimes we can't, let's say, come up to the base or come up to the platform on the stage on the day. And this is where I guess the third element comes in, which is that the Gita presents a very unique understanding of this. Because if you think about it, the self-development books of this world, they give us an understanding of the first two elements that we've spoken about to some extent. They don't necessarily go deep into spiritual identity, but they do help us to understand those first two. But then this last aspect is almost like, who's going to help me out here? Right? I keep studying, I keep understanding, but still somehow the other I'm failing. And the understanding that the Gita gives us is that the thoughts the remembrances and the forgetfulness that comes into our mind is a function of our desire to act in this world. And therefore, even though we may fail, the understanding the Gita is giving us is actually just keep going. Because if you keep showing that you want to act in the proper way, you want to speak in a pleasing way, in an uplifting way to other people, what will actually happen is that your, let's say, thoughts that come to the mind, because they do come to, that's the nature of thoughts. They're literally coming into our mind and we're choosing to act on them or not. They will start to become more and more uplifting because you're desiring that. That's the sort of crux of the Gita, that everything is based on one's desire. And so if somehow or the other we're falling, we're not able to come to the standard that we'd like to get to, etc. If we just keep trying, if we just keep our intention focused on that direction, then somehow or the other we will be able to come to that place, that over time it will get easier. And I'm sure many of you as students of Gita or as practitioners in spirituality in some way, shape, or form have experienced this point, that although it's difficult at the beginning, sometimes we're trying to change habits, we're trying to, improve ourselves, etc. If we just keep working at it, things become smooth, things become easier. We actually move in that direction. And so this aspect of pleasing speech and being able to be uplifting to other people, it just follows naturally from those first two elements. But sometimes we may run into roadblocks. And if we just keep at it, if we just keep following these three aspects, these three, points that we've made today, then you'll find for yourself, or at least I've seen it in my own life, that the thoughts that naturally come to your mind in the moment, even if it's a heated moment, even if it's a very, intense situation, will be more clear because of the first point, will be more based on understanding of the person and yourself in that situation, as we said in the second point, and will also more and more over time become pleasing, become sweet. And I'll leave you perhaps with this message, given that we're coming to that sort of half an hour mark. The Gita calls us to understand that our identity is beyond this world, which means that there is a reality beyond this. And it explains that because that reality is of a spiritual nature, then the nature of the interaction and exchange on that reality is very sweet, is very blissful, is very uplifting. And so the whole purpose, actually, in one sense, of this Gita is to help us to understand these points, is to help us to come to this place where our interactions with each other is on the level of our deepest identity, and therefore is also on the level of being extremely pleasing, extremely uplifting, extremely sweet. And we just have to go down that adventure for ourselves and see how we can bring up such a reality in our own lives. So maybe I'll pause there and see what thoughts are coming to people's minds and what questions or comments or reflections.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for running us through the analogy of the cup. While you were sharing, especially the C and the U, clarity of vision and understanding, I was thinking of something I heard just today, where I was listening to a story, and the story went along the lines of there was somebody who started a new job, and the job was being a woodcutter. And on his first day, he cut 20 trees. And then he was so enthusiastic because his boss was so proud of him. And then the next day he went, and then he says he's going to do it even better. And then he only cut 18 trees. And then he says, no, the next day he's going to do it even better. And then he goes, and then he only cuts 15 trees. And now he's just feeling dejected at every moment, on every day. And then somebody came to him and asked him, why well, asked him why. Oh no, they just came to ask him, have you taken time to sharpen your tools? And he says, no, there's no time to sharpen my tools because if I sharpen my tools, I won't be able to be productive for these trees. And then, of course, if he sharpened his axe at that time, he would have been able to cut more trees and be more productive. And I felt that was such a nice link to what you were sharing, that even though our outcome or the thing that we want to achieve is good speech, we can't just go to good speech. We have to do a groundwork. We have to sharpen that axe, the axe of our speech, in order to then get the outcome of cutting the tree or speaking sweet words. And I guess that's the beauty of the Bhagavad Gita, because it gives us the insights of how to have how to actually achieve internal transformation so that externally the products are sweet and beautiful, closest to our true identity. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. That was
Thank
beautiful.
you.
Maybe I'll kick off the first question on, as I was sharing, that we have to sharpen this tool. And you spoke about trying to understand, well, clarity of vision, being able to see clearly, and understanding. From a spiritual lens, what can we do practically to sharpen this tool, to have this clarity of vision, and to get this deep understanding?
Mm, yeah, it's a nice point. I guess what's coming to mind is study of the Gita, because I guess that's what we're here gathered around to speak about. But it actually is very much the answer to that question, at least in my own, understanding and realization. And that's for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that one of the things that is unique about the Gita is that it's speaking to us in our true, deepest identity, our spiritual identity. And what that comes with is that this is spiritual sound vibration. So even just daily or weekly connection with such a text has an impact that pulls us towards that deeper identity and that pulls us towards seeing from that deeper lens. So going back to those first 2 points that we were making, it's something as simple as simply being in contact with the literature actually has that impact on its own accord. And then, of course, it's on us to really go deeper with that, because what the Gita is really doing at its heart is giving us a very clear picture of the world around us, why things happen the way that they do, and why people act the way that they do, right? And so we can do it as on the most basic level of literally just spend some time with the Gita, and we can go all the way to sort of deep study of the text, which helps us to really uncover why is it that I'm feeling the way that I am? Why is it that people are behaving the way that they are? Why is it the world is working in the way that it is? And so simply with this aspect of doing what we've all gathered here to even just do, which is studying this text and go deeper into its understandings, it's a very practical thing that each one of us can do on a day-to-day basis. And the amazing thing is that although our context today is speech and being uplifting in the way that we're connecting with each other, the benefits are like tenfold from what we're speaking about, i.e., it will impact every other aspect of our life also, not just our speech, but our general wellness. It will also impact our relationships in general. It will also impact where we focus and prioritize in this world. There's so many different things that will come up in the course of you just taking on that simple journey. And I guess if it's think Gita getting together, that has to be the solution, to study the Gita a little bit more.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you. I feel like everyone here is already on their path to good speech because we are learning the Gita, and I think this is the start of it. Um, so thank you everybody for being here again and being on your path to good speech. Um, Cody, I see your hand up. Please, yeah, unmute and share.
Yep. Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for such a wonderful um, kind of discussion with about this. I was wondering, with respect to understanding, you spoke so wonderfully about how we should develop an understanding and more clarity with regards to um, the situation, the other person, and ourselves. How much do you think we should care about being understood and feeling understood? Because we've discussed before, and I've heard before how feeling misunderstood is actually a blessing in disguise. But um, practically speaking, it's been the case that it's impeded. It holds the power to impede us trying to uplift other people if we're not properly understood. So, how do we navigate such situations? and how much weight should we give to this point?
Yeah, such a wonderful point. I'm sure that many of us can relate to that question as a sort of dynamic that takes place in our life. This idea of wanting to be understood. The Gita is really wonderful because oftentimes when you meet sort of, let's say, new spiritualists, they might give you the understanding to a question like this or to a topic like this that you should just neglect. It's not about you. It's about doing things for other people. And even the you that you're speaking about, it's not a real you. There's a deeper you. And so that you just leave it alone. But the Gita helps us to understand that although there may be some truth in some of those statements, you do have a deeper identity that goes beyond this physical self and even this mental self. But all of them have to be taken care of. All of your different levels of identity, as well as the package that you've come with. Let's say it that way. The psychophysical makeup that we have. And so this idea of wanting to be understood is very much fundamental to the human condition, and it's not something that we can avoid. But what comes to mind is a couple of points. One is that the Bhagavad-gita helps us to understand that there is one person who's very close to your heart. In fact, it's explained that Rit-deshe, that he's seated in the region of the heart, and this divinity which the Gita is speaking about is the only person that can fully understand one. Right? And so this idea of being fully understood, which is usually our quest in this world of being completely airtight understood, not sometimes, yeah, the Gita is calling us to think about this topic of, will you be able to be fully understood in this world? And maybe bringing about some detachment from this concept. But that's one sort of aspect. And then the question is, okay, I may not be able to be fully understood, but I want to be well understood. And it's natural. It's a topic that's coming to my mind every day. It's coming in my relationships and my conversations, etc. So how do I arrange basically for that? Well, the Gita calls us to bring ourselves into a situation, into a group of people who are like-minded and who can actually understand us, right? Because we're coming from let's put it this way, because we're going in a similar direction in life, and because we are trying to understand things on a deeper level, i.e., these 2 points of clarity of vision and understanding, those spiritualists who are sincerely taking up that practice will be able to do a nice job of understanding us to a greater extent, or to the extent that's possible. And so we try to situate ourselves with people who can actually do that for us, who can actually, to some good extent, understand us and understand it from the first point, which is that I may not be able to be fully understood. So it's almost like a half-half kind of answer, which maybe feels like, wait, but where are we actually really? But I feel like that's the reality, at least that I've understood from this text. And if we're not in a position where we're taking care of that need to be understood, then it's almost against what the Gita describes as dharma, the right thing to do, duty and nature. So to neglect it is also something that will be very detrimental to us over time. And so we really have to take it upon ourselves to create a situation in our life where we do have people around us who are actually able, at least to some extent, to understand us for who we are. And at the same time, we try to develop a relationship with that divinity who can understand us on an even deeper level. And these two aspects come together, basically. That's what's coming to my mind. What do you think?
Yeah, makes sense. I think, practically speaking, like we can't pick and choose who we surround ourselves with all the time. Um, so definitely something that I will try to imbibe in the way I'm dealing with people, and then we'll get back.
Yeah, one point was coming to mind as you were saying that. It's amazing because our childhood or our early circumstances in this world have left such an impression that even though we may not be associating with those people that we were with at that time, still the imprints are there very deeply. And the reason for that is because we place a lot of value on those people and at that time, and because there was strong, constant association. So we can take that concept forward and understand that although we may not be able to pick and choose all the time who we're going to be with, what situations we're going to be with, if we can create a circumstance in our life, even if it's for a period of time, where we have strong, constant association of people that we look up to and that care about us, those imprints will be so deep that it doesn't necessarily matter if you're not always able to pick and choose, because they will be carrying you into the future.
Maybe just something I was thinking about on this question, that links really nicely to your first point on clarity of vision. Um, there's been many times I feel like I was misunderstood, and at that time, even if you argue about it, you're just not going anywhere because nobody's really seeing the situation for what it is. Everyone's looking at it from their perspective, and then you just pause from it and take it away, and then when you take it away and then reflect more deeply on the understanding of the Bhagavad-gita and trying to understand the identity, you almost start noticing a subtle change in yourself to say, was I actually misunderstood or was I misunderstanding myself? Because there's a chance that we start misidentifying ourselves with our body, and then that's what's misunderstood. But when we get the clarity of vision of our own selves, then it sort of makes the conversation clearer. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, that's my thought.
Yeah, that's so nice. And that's why there's this aspect of understanding oneself as well as understanding others. And you're right, some of which of our life is spent sort of not really seeing our own situation very clearly. And it always starts there, right? It always starts with our own situation. Thank you.
Everybody, please feel free to raise your hands or drop questions in the chat, and we can pick that up. I will just go with I'll go with the question unless anybody has a question. Okay, while you're thinking, please raise your hands or chat, put something in the chat. Maybe just a question on a heated scenario, heated situation, when it's inevitable, it happens almost every day, or there's just times where we need to react and the words are not going to be uplifting and things. How do you deal with it in a practical way? And I don't know if this is going to link towards creating good habits so that you can build on it, or just what do you do at that moment to help you navigate your speech?
Yeah, it's a nice point. I came to the Gita initially from very much like a self-development lens years ago. And what I guess was my context is that I tried a lot of the things and tried to, hear a lot of the things that was being put out there in terms of content in relation to how to be the best version of ourselves. One of the things that I was seeing and finding was that this question that you're asking was very much a big part of reality, because it was like you could know everything, quote unquote, whatever everything means. You can know an understanding of the situation. You can see things more so for what they are, but still in the moment, I'm flying in one direction that I shouldn't have been flying in. Still in the moment, words are coming out of my mouth that I would have not chosen to come out of my mouth. Still in the moment, I'm reacting in ways that I just, wouldn't have wanted to react in. And so this aspect of where does knowledge in and of itself get you in that situation is a big question. And the Gita is very nice in that regard, because I think for myself, for example, earlier this year, I was going through the Gita, and I think this is kind of a key topic that comes up towards the end of the third chapter, where Arjuna is basically making this point. He's like, Krishna, what is it that's making me act in such a way that I'm not even trying to do something? It's against my will. He describes it as anichcha. It means against my will. And still I'm falling into these situations. And Krishna says multiple things, but one of the interesting things that he takes Arjuna to in terms of a conversation is something I've really reflected, because I think, you mentioned this point about, for me, practically, what do I do? He mentions this point that one of the things that we should understand is the hierarchy of the different functions in our, let's say, cognitive state. He says that above dull matter is the senses, above the senses is the mind, and above the mind is the intelligence. And so he says, if you actually want to be well equipped in the heated situation, you have to understand which part to focus on, which thing to train, so that you can go into those situations well. He makes the point that what happens for most people is that although this hierarchy exists, because the senses have been left to just roam very freely in this world and have not been necessarily trained appropriately, they take over, and they take over the mind. So what happens is that although we know what to do mentally, or our intelligence has some understanding of what to do, the senses, including speech, for example, our tongue, it just acts as a responsive function in this world. But he says, if you see things for what they are, and you know that actually above the senses is the mind and above the mind is the intelligence, then you spend time training your intelligence. Spend time training your intelligence to act in the appropriate ways in a given situation. And so that's what this idea of studying the Gita, of meditation practices, of all these kinds of things is basically. It's helping your intelligence to go from the state of basically being crippled, being like on a wheelchair, to being able to be a strong player in the ring at the time. Because at the moment, what happens is that you have like your bodybuilder muscle mass senses, and you have like the intelligence on a wheelchair. And so the senses win all day, and they just respond as a function of their natural sort of state. But if you have that intelligence, which is sitting on a wheelchair, and you slowly train him up to also be a strong body mass bodybuilder, then he can actually act in the situation also. And it's explained that the intelligence is almost like the intelligence in the mind is almost like mother and child. So the child just acts freely, not really seeing things for what they are, and is taken over by the senses and the connection between senses and sense objects. But the mother can say, no, wait, chill out. You're going to get burnt if you touch the stove. So in this way, if we train the intelligence, and this is something that I've been just reflecting on for myself, if I just keep training my intelligence, spending time with spiritual subject matter, with understanding things and practicing things in my life, including through meditation, then when the time comes, you have this gap, right? You have this clarity of vision. And even though your senses might say, or your mind might say, let's just say it. We should just like tell them they're stupid. Your intelligence basically comes and says, wait a second, but this is the actual picture. Now respond according to this picture. And you have that space to make that decision. And sometimes you may fail. I fail 100%. But over time, it becomes easier and easier.
That is beautiful. Um, wow. Yeah, I love the understanding of the hierarchy, but then also understanding how the intelligence is on the wheelchair and actually just needs to be uplifted and strengthened to then be able to make the decisions or make the right decisions. Um, I felt like this also linked really nicely to the first point of clarity of vision. And I want to say a constant theme I got from there was us needing to be the observer and trying to observe the situation, and then now linking it to what you're sharing now, finding that space between stimulus and reaction or response.
Mm-hmm.
That space is where observance comes. But if there's no space, there's no way to observe, and then you just react.
Yeah.
Yeah, and from what I understand from you, is just if we build up our intelligence, that intelligence will give us a bigger space between stimulus and response. And then in that we can hopefully get more sweeter, more uplifting speech.
Yeah. Yeah, but bigger space and also like an actual like a deeper understanding of the picture.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else with a question? Otherwise, you're gonna be forced to just hear my questions.
We like your questions.
Okay, I'm going for another question in case somebody else can think, then please share. But we've spoke we've we've spoke a lot about external speech, and I saw Sangeeta's raised a few points on internal speech. Do you have any thoughts on internal speech? And maybe there's two parts to this. One, internal speech is the mind, and maybe you've already covered it now, where if we sharpen the intelligence, then we can get the mind under control, and then that will help the internal chatter. But more than that is the speech that we have with divinity, or the speech that we have in trying to create a divine connection. Do you just have any thoughts on that?
That's a broad one. Yeah. Yeah, this idea of internal dialogue is such a huge thing, right? Like it's something that really plagues us on a day-to-day basis. So much of the world and our own situation is this internal chatter, which maybe isn't necessarily so helpful. What the Gita really emphasizes to us is that our situation is not one of just randomness. It's one of steady building, whether it's conscious or unconscious, in the sense that this internal chatter and internal dialogue is not just a function of the current circumstance, but it's a function of the circumstances that I've lived up to this day, i.e., my childhood and my life up until now. But not just that, but it's also a function of if you're spiritual and you're the soul, it's also a function of previous lifetimes, right? It's also a function of previous impressions that one has. And so when you understand it from that perspective, you see things sort of quite clearly in understanding that it's not me. It's just a build up. It's just something that's been made up over time based on my circumstances. And it's been a long time, those circumstances. They've been building up for quite a while. And therefore, in order to retrain that dialogue, it's going to take me some time because there's so much momentum built up over a long period of time that I have to sort of be compassionate with myself to understand that this will take some time. And the idea of the Bhagavad-gita is that the heart is really seeking for internal chatter, internal dialogue, which is uplifting to oneself and to others. This whole topic that we're discussing today is what the Gita is calling us to go toward, is calling us on the adventure of. And that same dialogue that is uplifting is actually trained in connection with divinity. Going back to the question that you were asking, in the sense that as we make an active effort to have such a dialogue with divinity, have such a uplifting, beautiful, sweet dialogue with divinity, it naturally plays out as sweet, uplifting dialogue in our mind just on a general basis. And therefore, it will also play out in our relationships and actions with other people. So this being our primary relationship, at least according to the Gita, that we are Mama Eva Amsa, that we are parts and parcels of divinity, and therefore our primary relationship is with divinity. If we train that primary relationship, if we focus on that primary aspect in relation to the divine, that same dialogue that we're cultivating there will play out in our own internal dialogue and will also play out in our relationships. And it's so nice because it just makes life very simple, that simply by just focusing on that one aspect and allowing it to flow to the rest. And it has to be conscious that it flows to the rest. It's not just like I have one life here and I have another life here. Then everything else will sort of follow behind that. And it's such a nice point you're bringing up because it's really the deepest seated desire of our heart that we have some sweet, meaningful exchange, right, with divinity. And if we can just call ourselves to the adventure, to the excitement of connecting in that way, of building such a relationship and dialogue with divinity, it will engulf us so wonderfully that everything else will just fall behind naturally. Everything else will just fall into place behind that.
time, 9 o'clock. Um, I did want to ask a final question, but I think I'll just share you can add on it. Um, the last thing I was going to ask was if there's one takeaway you could share with all of us on good speech, what would it be? But I want to say that you've already concluded saying that we should sharpen our intelligence, and how we're going to do that is by understanding and deeply imbibing the teachings of the Bhagavad-gita, and that's what we gain the tools.
Well, losing your audio a little bit. Maybe it's me, I'm not sure.
Oh yeah. Oh, is it clearer now?
It gets like faint for a bit and then it comes back.
I feel like this computer has auto recognition, and then it just changes it on its own.
Oh, okay.
Can can you hear me?
Yeah, now it seems okay.
I I hope it's clear, but yeah, I want to say that the conclusion from today is if we take away one thing, we study the Bhagavad-gita, because that will help us to sharpen our intelligence, and through sharpening our intelligence, we'll have clearer speech. Um, yeah, is that a fair conclusion for today?
Yeah, I think if we just take some time to reflect on this sort of CUP acronym and the three different aspects of it, and if we focus on the fundamentals, let's say we focus on the basic aspects of ourself and understanding and clarity of vision, this idea of uplifting speech, of wonderful speech, of beautiful speech will naturally flow behind it. It will just be a function of your being, in the same way that you will glow because you're much more uplifted. In the same way, the words coming out of your mouth will also glow, because you're becoming an uplifting person by nature. And so it's so wonderful the Gita sort of comes to the root, right? It doesn't necessarily try to just make things look good on the surface level, but really comes to the root and helps us to create a natural situation where things are uplifting, beautiful, etc.
Yeah. Um, I know we're at time, but I just saw one question from Deepa. Do you have a few minutes just to?
Yeah, of course, of course. Should I
Is
read it
there a
out?
quick way to catch ourselves in the moment and switch from senses to intelligence in a heated or difficult situation? It always feels like it's easier to realize this after the way you've reacted. Sangeeta says connecting with breath work helps to catch oneself.
Nice. Yeah, that's a nice point. Um, Well, I'll share what's coming to my mind. You mentioned this point about you realize after the event that we shouldn't have said something or reacted in a certain way. The nature of the the process and the mind is it's explained in the 15th chapter of the Gita that sarvasya cha hamriti sanivisto mata smritir jnanam apohanam cha, that remembrance comes from divinity seated within the heart. So according to how deeply we actually feel like I shouldn't have done that, according to how deeply we actually understand that I want to be helpful to other people, I want to be uplifting to other people, based on that, thoughts will come to the mind at the time of the heated situation of being in that place. And so one of the things that we can do alongside breathwork, which Sangeeta is wonderfully mentioning, and some of the things that we've discussed today, is just really focus on my intention. Deeply focus on like, what am I trying to do? And how loving do I want to be as a person? Like, how do I channel that sort of nature that I have innate within me? Because as soon as you start to desire the right things, as soon as you start to desire uplifting ability, as soon as you start to desire being able to be loving towards other people, the thoughts will naturally come to your mind of how to do that. That's at least my understanding of what the Gita is giving us. It's 15:15 in the Gita. And if we just deeply try to go into this aspect of what are we looking for? How, like, do we really want to be uplifting to other people? And training ourselves and focusing on that desire, cultivating that desire, that when it comes time to our meditation, or when it comes time to our maybe we do some prayer or whatever it is that you might be practicing in your own life, bring this into that discussion, bring this into that situation, and really try to cultivate this desire to be pleasing to people. It will come naturally, guaranteed.
You make the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita so practical, and you make it sound so easy. Um, and I feel like it only comes once you actually try to live it and put it into practice, and then you realize it. Um, thank you so much, Neeraj, for such a deep, beautiful, meaningful discussion. Um, it was as I started, I'm so excited that you were the person who got to share this, because I feel like now everybody on the Zoom today got to witness what sweet, beautiful, uplifting discussion sounds like. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being here with us. And to everybody who's joined, hope you found it as useful, helpful, meaningful